This might look familiar to some of you, but I'd hardly blame you if it didn't. I'll explain in a minute. For now, we'll take note of the wind direction, see it's blowing about 16 knots, and go soaring. Welcome to DynaSoar, a fabric mod bringing hang gliding to Minecraft. I don't often discuss programming here, but secretly it's not only my day job, but one of my primary hobbies, and probably accounts for the lion's share of my waking hours. Some of you may remember a brief video I made ages ago of me flying around aimlessly in an elytra for about 90 seconds. What I didn't bother to clarify at the time was what I was actually doing was demonstrating a mod to expand the elytra with ridge soaring behavior. The video was mostly there so I could link it to people I play Minecraft with, and I figured what the hell, I post flight sim content, might as well leave it. But that was a good few months ago, and I put that project on ice because the elytra was a bit too fast to soar Minecraft-scale terrain effectively. Ever since then, though, I've had a bit of a bug to go back and redevelop it as a full vehicle entity that could be a bit more simulator and a bit less Minecraft. I made the original elytra mod in the space of an afternoon, so to my great discredit I thought it would be painless to make the transition to vehicle entity. If you've modded Minecraft before, you probably know what I was in for. At the time, I did not know. It actually isn't bad at all once you figure out what's going on, but boy howdy could Fabric use some better documentation. Maybe I'll get into a bit of a devlog in other videos, but for now let's discuss what exactly this mod is. It turns out the US Air Force beat me to the name DynaSoar back in the 60s, but I've decided I don't care. In short, it's a hang gliding simulator. We'll put simulator in quotes maybe, this is Minecraft. Allowances have to be made to make the tiny terrain soarable, and I've got way too many other projects going on to afford the mental bandwidth to do something like voxelized fluid simulation for airflow over terrain. This is a little simpler than that. That said, those quotes around simulator are a bit smaller than you might think for a Minecraft mod. On the physical authenticity scale, I'd put this somewhere between FSX and FS2020, or X-Plane. If you're a serious simmer, you know FSX is not exactly a high bar, and I'm not about to slap the quote as real as it gets label on DynaSoar here either, at least not just yet, and certainly not while I don't have real hang gliding experience as a point of comparison. That said, I think I will, maybe tentatively, call it a simulator. In practice, DynaSoar is just like any other vehicle, like a boat or minecart. You toss it on the ground, get in it, take off. You can break it and store it in your inventory, that whole deal. Like a boat, it controls with directional keys. I decided to go with that strategy over mouse control like the elytra to make it easier to free look while you're flying, since looking around is fairly important to locating lift. Past that, if you're used to the elytra, flying one of these things should be pretty natural. While simplified compared to DynaSoar, elytras are a very clever abstraction of how you manage energy in a glider, trading altitude for airspeed and vice versa. Your instincts for flying elytras efficiently will apply here, too. The biggest difference you'll notice is in handling. Unlike the elytra, a DynaSoar glider does not simply fly in the direction you point it. Like a real aircraft, at least a properly balanced one, a DynaSoar glider has a speed at which all the forces acting at it are roughly neutral. You can use movement inputs to shift your center of gravity, and in doing so, you also shift the pitch attitude and airspeed at which that neutral value is achieved. Hang glider pilots call the force required to do this bar pressure. If you make no input, that is to say you release all bar pressure, you will find that the glider will settle back toward a stable pitch attitude and airspeed. The second difference you'll notice is, unlike the elytra, DynaSoar gliders experience stalls. I'll spare you an elaborate explanation of stalls since it's not really the point of the video, and I imagine if you watch my stuff you probably already know all about them. But, in short, a stall occurs when the airflow over a wing becomes separated from the top of the wing. At that point, lift drops off sharply, drag increases sharply, and the aircraft is no longer in normal stable flight. A stall occurs when the angle of attack of a wing, that is to say its angle relative to the wind, exceeds a critical value that depends on the shape of the wing. This can happen at any speed. Stalls are occasionally desirable, such as on landing, but generally you'll want to avoid them, and recover quickly if you do encounter one by reducing your angle of attack. DynaSoar implements a shake animation as the glider approaches a stall to approximate the feeling of buffeting you feel before a wing stalls, and help you know when you're on the edge. But DynaSoar is a little more than a realism pass on the elytra. In real life, hang glider pilots fly for long periods of time and over great distances by seeking out rising air and riding it to higher altitudes. This is the mechanism I wanted to bring to Minecraft. There are three main ways gliders and sailplanes gain altitude: thermals, ridge lift, and wave lift. A thermal occurs when uneven heating of the ground, plus a few other factors, causes a column of air to rise consistently relative to the surrounding air. These columns of rising air often support cumulus clouds, and are the commonly known way of keeping sailplanes aloft. Ridge lift, however, is a bit simpler. Wind has to blow over the ground. If the ground is rising in the direction the wind is blowing, then the air must also rise. You can ride those currents too, and they have the advantage of being fairly predictable as long as you know the wind direction. You can harness ridge lift by flying back and forth along the windward side of a mountain ridge, and can typically achieve altitudes moderately higher than the peak of that ridge. Wave lift is similar to ridge lift, but is instead found on the lee side of the mountain some distance away. Waves form when the air flowing over the ridge crashes back down and rebounds. Wave lift is a little harder to find than ridge lift and requires the pilot to fly near regions of powerful sink along the lee side, but it can propel sailplanes to extraordinary altitude. At the time of writing, DynaSoar only models ridge lift. I do have plans to extend that to at least thermals, though. I also have some ideas for how wave lift could be implemented, but I suspect Minecraft terrain is simply too small in scale for wave lift to be of much use. We'll see. So, why'd I do this? Well, DynaSoar came about because of a slightly eclectic mix of factors. The first one, haha, glider go whoosh. That one's a constant, and I reckon just about anyone can appreciate it. The second, building simulators in places they don't belong tickles me in the sort of way that making Doom run on a graphing calculator does. It's just a fun challenge, and the results are kind of funny too. In this case, maybe they're even a little useful. Third, and forgive me a little bit of a rant, but I've always been frustrated with how gliders and fantasy wingsuits are presented in games in general. Usually they're either an impractical novelty or an auxiliary movement mechanic, almost like jumping or sliding. In Minecraft, they're a major quality of life step in the player progression, and admittedly very fun, but I still feel they're a little too good. Not too performant, mind you, but a little too straightforward. Elytras trivialize Minecraft travel, and trivial things are rarely fun for very long. Gliders in real life are challenging, and they're fun because they're challenging. A skilled sailplane pilot with a high-performance sailplane can fly all day on a tow to a few thousand feet, and cover a few hundred miles while they're at it. But doing so demands knowledge, practice, and sometimes intuition to fly the aircraft optimally, make good predictions about where to find rising air, and navigate effectively while you do it. As a sort of fringe benefit, the demands of hunting rising air also make you engage with and appreciate the world around you, and in doing so you go places that you might otherwise not have bothered to go, and see things that you might otherwise not have seen. I'm a big fan of Minecraft's terrain engine. I feel it's still the best example of a diverse, well-crafted procedural generation engine on the market today. So to me, it seemed like a natural fit. And fourth, past the second-to-second gameplay, it annoys me that elytras don't really need infrastructure. I'm no Ilmango, but I am a technical player. I live for building infrastructure, and I've always found elytras a little bittersweet in that they handily outpace pretty much everything except dolphin highways. I want to have a reason to build stuff to enhance transportation around my Minecraft world, and the bigger and more interesting the undertaking, the better. A proper glider is not only interesting to soar long distances with in and of itself, but it's also an excuse to undertake major infrastructure projects to make doing so easier. Build artificial mountains for ridge lift, maybe thermals from magma blocks. Build nice launching and landing sites at your bases, build ground-based wind indicators to help you on your way, maybe even slime block launchers. Albeit at the time of writing, I have yet to implement thermals or redstone outputs from wind sensors, but that whole idea just seems a bit more fun to me than throwing a big sugarcane farm at the problem and calling it a day. Not that I haven't had a great time building sugarcane farms, but you only get to build one of them. And the fifth reason, distant horizons and do a barrel roll. Like I said, I experimented with elytra soaring the better part of a year ago. It was interesting, and I decided I definitely wanted to pursue something like DynaSoar at that point, but it did seem like it would mostly amount to a novelty. Just a bit ago, though, some friends and I started toying with some mods on my server, which is unusual because a lot of us are relative purists. Those mods were Distant Horizons and Do a Barrel Roll. Do a Barrel Roll made me fall in love with the elytra all over again, and paired with Distant Horizons, the two mods proved to me that a harder core simulator in Minecraft could be a unique, fun experience and not just a novelty. That was plenty for me, so I got started. Let's talk a little bit about how DynaSoar works. Like X-Plane, FS 2020, Flyout, and a few others, DynaSoar is a blade element simulator. The aerodynamic simulation is accomplished by dividing wings into a collection of wing elements, which are just little wings that you perform lift and drag calculations on, that then work together to represent the whole wing. Blade element is desirable over single element simulations, like FSX, because it allows you to simulate force and motion very directly, and capture things like differences in angle of attack between the root and tip of your wing while you're actively rolling, or the passive stability you gain by loading an aircraft so its center of gravity is positioned ahead of its center of lift, and counterbalanced with the downforce from the horizontal stabilizer. Single-point simulators have to handle this sort of thing in abstraction, using arbitrary scalars to get something that feels right. This isn't a horrible approach, and it's computationally inexpensive, but in practice it often feels rigid or on rails. Further, it's not very scalable. You can create one aircraft and tune it until it feels the way you want, but if you create another aircraft, you're going to have to start all over in that tuning process. So instead, rather than trying to solve for the whole aircraft at once, we instead try to solve for an arbitrary wing element, which can have a position, rotation, and area. We then create as many of these wing elements as necessary in as many different positions and orientations as necessary to roughly model what our aircraft looks like in real life. The end result of processing all of these separate elements should be a reasonable approximation of how the aircraft should perform. It's not perfect. Aerodynamic simulations are frustratingly inscrutable, especially in real time. We still test airplanes in real-world wind tunnels for a reason. But with a little tuning, it can be very convincing. And when you create a new aircraft, all you gotta do is define the wing elements, and it'll already fly pretty close to how you want it to. Implementing blade element is pretty easy in engines like Unity, where you already have a full rigid body simulation and can simply measure velocity from positions, apply force at positions, and convert anything and everything to and from local and global coordinate systems whenever you want. Minecraft, however, is a bit lower level than that. Position, velocity, and acceleration are as good as it gets for the translational stuff, and you could forget about pitch and roll altogether. Fixing that was a bit of an uphill battle. It wouldn't have been so bad, but at the time I was brand new to Minecraft modding, and 90% of what I was looking at may as well have been in Phyrexian. I was happy with myself when I got an entity model to load, and wasn't sure yet what the engine would let me get away with. I'm glad I stuck with it, though. An advantage of Minecraft being as low level as it is that it's also very seldomly obstructive. If you want something done, you might have to get a little creative, but you're probably not going to hit an intractable engine limitation. I'll try not to get too devloggy here, as I'm sure you probably don't care, but just in case you were trying to solve a problem like this in Minecraft yourself, here's a summary of how DynaSoar solves these problems. First, pitch and roll features are added to the glider as simple class fields, and then added to or subtracted from with Verlet integration. Verlet integration has a cool name, but all it really means is that you're performing all your additions and subtractions on velocity rather than position, and then you move your object to the next position based on its current velocity and elapsed time. This is how stock Minecraft handles entity physics, just extended to support rotations. If you need to do something like this, just look it up by that name. You'll find plenty of documentation. 2. A custom renderer rotates the model in accordance with its pitch and roll. This is done with Fabric's matrix stack functions. While that problem itself isn't very complicated, the problem of how Minecraft creates and renders models kind of is. I'm gonna not get into that here because it's a long subject, but if you're trying to fight your way through it, I recommend comparing the boat entity and minecart entity renderers existing in the source code and paying some reference to the Fabric wiki. A lot of it's out of date, but it can be enough to get by. 3. A wing element class is created, containing all of the parameters that we'll need to simulate our wing. In our case, those are a vector defining the local position of the element relative to the glider, a vector defining the incident rotation of the element relative to the glider, a bool defining whether the airfoil is treated as flat or cambered, a float providing the wing area, and a string to identify that element from others. A number of these wing elements are created in the entity constructor in order to form the wings. I do this in a series of for loops, one per wing. 4. The velocity of the glider is rotated based on the glider's present rotation in order to obtain the velocity of the glider in the glider's local space. This value is then passed to each wing element. 5. Each wing element performs a second transformation to find the velocity at that wing element. An example, during a roll, an element toward the tip of a wing is moving faster than one towards the root. 6. Each element performs a third transformation to rotate that new vector into the element's local coordinate system, each of which may be independently rotated relative to the glider. And 7. The arctangent of each element's local y and z velocity is used to determine the element's angle of attack, which drives the lift and drag equations for that element. 8. Lift and drag equations require coefficients, which are based on the angle of attack of the surface being simulated. For real-life applications, those coefficients are typically determined experimentally. But since we need to do this in real time, I decided to base them on polynomial approximations of the real-world curves. which is a very fancy way of saying I looked up a few lift and drag curves on airfoiltools.com and screwed around at Desmos until I came up with curves that looked about the same. Nothing too crazy, just a bit manual. The glider here is based on a rough average of the physical parameters of real hang gliders, the lift and drag equations documented by NASA's education pages, and the lift and drag coefficient curves for a Regolo airfoil. Admittedly, this is not completely without number fudging, especially since I need to consider game balance as well as realism. But the point is you aren't playing Star Fox. The glider doesn't roll left because you held A. It rolls left because holding A moved the pilot's weight to the left, and that offset weight applied a torque to the glider to roll it to the left. None of that is to say that DynaSoar is, quote, not a toy, because it totally is. But it's not quite so grab and go as other Minecraft vehicle mods. Soaring in real life is fun, and something you can practice and get good at, and it rewards you with long ranges and flight times when you are good at it. My objective with DynaSoar is to bring a little of that gameplay loop to Minecraft too, and see if I can slot it into the Minecraft transportation matrix somewhere where it could be interesting and practical. So far so good, I think. At least I've had a lot of fun testing it. As for when I'll be done with this and releasing it, well, soon, hopefully. I wish I could say something more certain than that, but my hands are pretty full at the moment. Aside from thermals, the system is roughly feature complete as is, but I still have to do things like ensure it works properly over a network, breaks when you punch it and drops an item, that sort of thing. But since I've got the simulator part built and flying pretty much the way I want, I thought I'd take the opportunity to show off what I've got so far while I've got the time to. I have no idea how much of the world shares in my weird little obsession for hang gliders. My guess is not very much, but hopefully this is at least half as interesting to you as it is to me. And that's about it for my formal script. Of course, it turns out that I've still got about 6 minutes of footage. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to let this play out. You can stay or not stay, and in the meantime, I will just explain what I'm doing and what's going on. Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's helpful, I don't know. I just cut, but this is a good flight that I think demonstrates the purpose and function of the mod pretty well, so I just don't have it in me to cut it short. And already it happens that we're at a fairly interesting part of this flight, because I have run almost entirely out of altitude. The wind is shifted and I believe died down a little bit since my departure point. It was very high at the departure point. 17 knots is insane for a real hang glider, but it's sort of modest for this. Oh, it's still very high. But anyway, that's towards the upper band, or the upper limit of what the wind can reach. So it's quite a bit lower now. The wind has died down. And I am desperately trying to work out the direction that the lift is in. And I didn't describe it. Of course, I've now found some, and I'm hoping that I can ride this to some larger terrain features down the way. But anyway, one thing I didn't describe in my original script is the wind implementation. Of course, I talked about how lift is implemented. Actually, I just said that it's there. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the way wind is implemented is the glider is effectively just being teleported in the direction of the wind at the speed of the wind. You can't really feel this as you're flying it. But this is to simulate what it is like for an aircraft in a moving air mass. The aircraft isn't being, like, the wind doesn't accelerate the aircraft relative to the air. The aircraft exists in the air and the air moves along. So I figured the simplest way that this could be done was just to move the glider under the hood. So that's what's happening here. Works pretty well, feels about right to me. And that provides the easiest way to determine the direction of the wind while you're just flying along. You can see, if you look down, that there is a difference between the direction the glider is facing and the direction the glider is moving. In aviation, that's typically called a crab angle, and that is the easiest way to work out where your wind is coming from. Right now, I believe I have a bit of a tailwind, and you can see that I've got the nose yawed about 5 degrees off of the direction that we're moving. And I just picked up lift here, so I must actually have a headwind here. The fact that we're moving this quickly suggests that the headwind is quite light. I think it is a quartering headwind. Oh yeah, the modeling of ridge lift specifically. So the way that works, I mentioned earlier that I just don't really have the time or mental bandwidth to do a computational fluid dynamics implementation in Minecraft, which, as funny as that would be, yeah, not really. Part of what gave birth to this whole project and in the Elytra system before this was actually a system that I came up with to approximate ridge lift in Stormworks. Which, of course, if you've played Stormworks, you know it's a horrible environment for gliders. But myself and a friend of mine were working with various ways to crowbar them, and I wanted to see if I could come up with a way of modeling ridge lift. And my thought was that I could draw a laser beam from the aircraft down, just on the global down axis, and then sweep at that laser in the direction that the aircraft, or in the direction of the wind. I could measure the wind direction, and I could sweep the laser in the direction of the wind, and I could measure the change in distance off of the laser. And in doing so, I could determine a slope of the terrain underneath me as the direction of the wind goes. And I never got this to work well in Stormworks because getting Stormworks gliders to work is, yeah, it's utter nonsense, and I didn't feel like cheating in exactly the ways that I would have to cheat, and the way that I was attempting to get the cheat to work, I don't know, it never felt right to me. But anyway, it occurred to me I could do that in Minecraft too. Minecraft makes it pretty easy to come up with the height of terrain around you, so that's the strategy at work here. The wind vector comes from a big Perlin noise field, mostly the same way as the terrain itself is generated. Oh, and you can see I speed up a lot here because I pick up a tailwind as I come back towards the mountains trying to gain some altitude. I'm very desperate at this point. But anyway, yeah, the wind direction is determined by the gradient. So this Perlin noise field creates pressure zones where the highest values have the highest pressures. And wind direction and velocity is a computed gradient, sort of like a Sobel filter sort of operation is being performed. So the wind vector is just a vector that points at the glider's position, or at the glider measures the field at the glider's position, and it determines the gradient from high pressure to low pressure at the glider, and that's the wind the glider feels. Meanwhile, the place you measure that is given by your world coordinates, and it's also scrolled gradually throughout the day. So the wind changes per location throughout the day. But for any given time, if time wasn't moving at all, then two people in the same place would measure the same local wind, but two people in two different places would measure two different local winds. See, now I'm starting to have some luck. I haven't quite worked out where the direction of the wind is, and you can see, I think, right here that I'm going to get a ton of it, because I've been riding up the back of the mountain behind here to get even this far, but there's much less of it than I expect. So I'm real close to the ground now. Eventually I do figure out the direction that it's coming from and gain some decent altitude, but yeah, not just yet. The way the lift itself is generated from the terrain. So I measure the slope like I was talking about effectively just by measuring the height in a line in the direction the wind is moving. I compute an angle, or an overall, like an average angle of the terrain when I do that, and then I multiply the velocity I multiply the velocity of the wind by I think I did it by the sine of that computed angle, and come up with an updraft that way. That's probably pretty generous compared to real life, but I think it's good enough for this. Feels good. It's predictable, fun. Oh, and that value for lift is that value for lift is reduced with altitude. It's attenuated. That's the term that I was looking for. So you can ride up a mountain to maybe 50% taller than the mountain, but the higher you go, the less influence from the slope you'll get. my objective here, now that I've managed to find some lift after all this time, is I want to break the cloud layer. I was able to on a much earlier version of this glider, back when it was a single-point simulator. I started as a single-point simulator before deciding that it would be better to evolve it to a blade element simulator. But anyway, naturally it's gone through a lot of iterations since then, so I wanted to see if it was still possible. So what I'm doing here is flying back and forth along the windward ridge, just barely short of the clouds, hoping that I can make it the rest of the way up. Oh, and that bubble popping noise, that is serving as a total energy compensated variometer. The point is to measure whether the total energy of the glider is increasing or decreasing. And we do that by looking at the airspeed and at the vertical speed, and we want to see both of those values together average positive. Like, we want to see the airspeed stay the same and the altitude go up, or vice versa, or maybe they both go up together. That's how we know that we're adding energy to the glider. That's what we want. In this case, the faster and the higher pitch the beeps, the better. And I've made it, so I'm satisfied. This is already pretty long, and I knew at this point that I was going to be massively overshooting the amount of dialogue that I had written, so I'm now looking for somewhere to land. I probably could fade to black here, but we've come this far. Yeah, check out this crazy lake we get down here. I was talking earlier about how soaring gives you it gives you some impetus to look or to pay attention to the world and go places you otherwise might not have. And I've seen all kinds of interesting things this way. It's strange. You get used to your Minecraft world, and it seems kind of normal. I really underestimated how many crazy features there are in a Minecraft world on like a per kilometer basis. I have been discovering so much wilder stuff than I'm really used to seeing in the course of testing this, and I've had it probably over about a 20-kilometer radius. Also, there's really a ton of the, I don't know, what are they called? The pillager watchtowers? Those things are everywhere. Here I'm trying to get myself a decent approach for this village. I've got a huge tailwind. I want to land into the wind. But it's a little bit stiffer than I'm expecting. And I do not have the altitude that I plan to. So I make a quick diversion and we stall right into here. And with that very indirect flight, we made it about 5 kilometers.